Okay then, and so this is the last video for this week because I'm going to teach you the live lesson for lesson two. So what I'm going to do is read both the articles to you. Terror on Our Streets is a modern article, and Martha Turner's Murder is the article that you looked at a few weeks ago about Jack the Ripper murder. While we're reading, I want you to consider, how do the writers present women in both of the articles? Um, and I will talk a little bit about that at the end of each article, okay, to help support your understanding for what we're going to do in lesson two. First article, Terror on Our Streets. And this was actually something that I remember happening in the news in 2006 when 5 prostitutes were murdered in quite quick succession. And they were kind of hunting for this killer. Terror on Our Streets. The Ipswich murders have raised disturbing parallels with the Yorkshire Ripper case, writes Julie Bindel. Wednesday, the 13th of December, 2006. The news barely registered at first, just a passing story in a local newspaper. The naked body of a woman had been found in a brook in Ipswich, Suffolk, on December the 2nd. Sorry, I just want to make that. Her name was Gemma Adams. She was 25. She had been working as a street prostitute. Few seem to have been too worried about this story. Many people still wrongly believe, just as they did during the hunt for Peter Sutcliffe, the so-called Yorkshire Ripper, that men who harm and kill women in prostitution are no danger to respectable women. It wasn't until it emerged that a friend of Adams was also missing then, and that she was a prostitute, working the same beat, that the case made the national press. The friend's name was Tanya Nicol, and she was 19. Her body was discovered 6 days after Adams's, partially naked, in the same stretch of water. On Sunday, as journalists were piecing together the facts from the police and trying to ascertain whether reports of a possible serial killer were mere speculation, the body of a third woman, Annalee Alderton, 24, was discovered in the woods. Today, the post-mortem report concluded that she had been strangled. On Monday, police expressed concern regarding 2 other missing women, Paula Clennell, 24, and Annette Nichols, 29, also street workers. As this piece goes to press, the bodies of 2 more women have been found and are yet to be identified. Prostitutes regularly turn up dead, and when they do, they're lucky if their stories make the local papers. Murder is often regarded as an occupational hazard of street work. We barely notice if the murderer is caught, and few care that prostitute murders have the lowest clear-up rates of any type of homicide. It's estimated that 90 prostitutes have been murdered in the UK in the past 12 years, a figure that hardly dents the national consciousness. Once it came to light that there was potentially a serial killer stalking the streets, though, the tabloid press started having a field day. And when police gave a press conference after Alderton's body was discovered, advising women to stay off the streets, if you're out alone at night, you are putting yourself in danger, we could have been right back in 1977, when police effectively put a curfew on women during Sutcliffe's killing spree. In issuing that curfew, women in West Yorkshire were made to feel responsible for preventing male violence, just as women in Ipswich are now. It makes us feel as if we are to blame, one street prostitute in Ipswich noted on the news yesterday. But it's him who's making the streets dangerous, not us. During the 1970s and 1980s, Sutcliffe killed 13 women and left 7 others for dead. The body of his first victim, 28-year-old Wilma McCann, was discovered in 1975, and from the beginning, the West Yorkshire Police were guilty of dragging their feet and bungling the investigation. Complacent police officers overlooked vital clues, and inadequate technology was used to collate the thousands of interviews and intelligence. Amidst all of this, Sutcliffe just kept killing, with hammers, screwdrivers and knives, and police were no further forward by the time that the body of his 5th victim, Jane MacDonald, was discovered in June 1977. MacDonald's murder was described by police and press as a tragic mistake. Previous victims had all been prostitutes, and therefore, in the eyes of many, complicit in their own demise. MacDonald was 16, though, and described by police as respectable and innocent. Victims were duly divided into deserving and not so deserving victims. 5 years after the Ripper's first murder, the only solution that police had come up with was to impose a curfew on women. We were urged to stay indoors, and told, "Do not go out at night unless absolutely necessary and only if accompanied by a man you know." Sutcliffe himself gave the same advice to his sister. How much has really changed? On my way to work this morning, two men were chatting at a bus stop, reading the coverage of the Ipswich case. "My sister lives in Ipswich," said one. "Yeah, but don't worry, he's only doing the tarts," came the reply. Now, this is a really interesting article because you have to think quite carefully about what the writer thinks about women. She's telling us a lot about how women are treated by society, and particularly how prostitutes are treated, and how when there are murders, people don't pay as much attention, the press doesn't pay as much attention, the police don't take it as seriously if it's a prostitute murder, because these women are seen to be putting themselves in danger in the first place. And actually, I think this writer thinks that's wrong. She questions how much has really changed. And is it okay to murder prostitutes? Does it make it okay to kill somebody just because of that they do something like that for a living? Um, I think that's what she's questioning. I think she is presenting women as people that get blamed for men's actions. The fact that women have to kind of stay in and take responsibility for keeping themselves safe when it wasn't them, it wasn't their fault that they weren't safe. And this is something that's still kind of an argument today when we talk about things like victim blaming. And when we talk about things like, not walking around the streets late at night on your own as a young girl with short skirt on or whatever, you could be asking for trouble. That kind of attitude is really dangerous because it basically says that women should be protecting themselves and it's not men that are being dangerous that are the issue. And I think that's this woman's point of view. It is written by a woman as well, which I think does matter. And you can see by where she phrases things like respectable women. She doesn't have much respect for this idea that prostitutes aren't as important as every other human being. And actually, she's quite defensive of women. You could also say that she shows how women are treated by the press by using some of her other quotes. Okay, let's read the second article. Now, you have read this article already. I'm going to read it again. I want you to really focus on how the women are being presented, please. Martha Turner's murder. Jack the Ripper. In August 1888, the East London Observer reported on the Whitechapel mystery. Hold on, the puppy wants to come in. The identity of the woman who was found so cruelly murdered and outraged at 37 George Yard Buildings on the morning after Bank Holiday has at least been decided, and henceforth the murdered woman will be known as Martha Turner. It cannot, however, be said with any degree of certainty that that was her correct name. It was simply the name by which she was known among her equally unfortunate associates on the streets, because unhappily one result of the inquiries made has been to connect the deceased with that class of women whom poverty or misfortune have driven to seeking a living upon the streets of London. The woman who identified the poor unfortunate was Connolly, otherwise known as Pearlie Poll, a tall, masculine-looking woman who had been hunted up by Inspector Reed of the Criminal Investigation Department. Beyond identifying the body, Poll gave another piece of information, which seemed at the time likely to prove immediately useful. She stated that on the night preceding the murder, she was in company with the deceased in the Whitechapel Road when they were accosted by two soldiers, who invited them to drink at a neighbouring public house. The invitation was accepted, and the women and soldiers stood drinking there till late in the night, when something was said in the hearing of Connolly about the deceased accompanying one of them to George Yard. At a parade of soldiers which took place in the Tower on Monday, a man was identified as being present, but the soldier refused to give any account of himself. This information was sufficient to warrant taking Connolly to the Tower in order to endeavour to identify the soldiers with whom the women had been drinking, two of whom had been placed under temporary arrest on suspicion. Inspector Reed, accompanied by Pearlie Poll, proceeded to the Tower on Monday morning, and Pearlie Poll was asked, "Can you see either of the men that you saw with the woman now dead?" Poll, in no way embarrassed, placed her arms akimbo, glanced at the man with an air of an inspecting officer, and shook her head. This indication of a negative was not sufficient. "Can you identify anyone?" she was asked. Pearlie Poll explained, with a good deal of feminine emphasis, "He ain't here." There is one fact noted by Inspector Reed which seems to prove that the murderer was a military man, and that is the wound on the breastbone of the woman. It will be recollected that at the inquest, when asked his opinion as to the instrument with which the wounds were inflicted, Dr. Keeling replied that they were undoubtedly committed with an ordinary pocket knife, all except the wound on the breastbone. There have been many visitors to George Yard Building since the murder, with the rather morbid purpose of seeing the place where the deceased was discovered. Here, there is still a large surface of the stone, flags crimson stained. It is at the spot where the blood oozed from the poor creature's heart. From an interview with Connolly, it appeared that Martha Tanner had lived apart from her husband for some years and had latterly attempted to get her living by hawking. Okay then. It doesn't actually say who this was written by, but I'd almost guarantee it was written by a man in the Victorian times. And this man has quite a condescending view of women that are working on the street. When he says that class of women, the pronoun that is being used to kind of be derogatory there. Poverty or misfortune have driven to seeking a living. So it's kind of like they're desperate. They have to be out there. I think he's quite mean to Poll, a tall, masculine-looking woman. Obviously doesn't believe that she's called Pearly Poll, or she's not called Pearly Poll, but that's her street name. So he shows that by using these quote marks. He also, there's a couple of things where he almost sounds like he's taking the mick out of her. Where he says Poll was in no way embarrassed, and placed her arms akimbo, which is kind of out like that. He obviously feels she should be embarrassed. And I think the reason he thinks she should be embarrassed is because she's there basically saying that I'm a prostitute in front of a load of men. Right at the end, though, we do have this poor creature's heart. So he does show sympathy towards women as well. Okay, so you can try and get a variation of ideas from that. Okay, so hopefully you will find all of that work fairly straightforward, and then I will see you for the live lesson on Thursday, and we'll go through how to collect those quotations and write up an answer. Any problems, please contact me. Have a lovely week, and I look forward to seeing you on Thursday.